of protest, these campamentos and these strikes, what are the outcomes that first you have observed? Are they sustainable? Do they produce change? Because if you look at the Arab Spring, usually what happened was that despots and militaries took power afterwards. No? So what are the outcomes of new forms of protest? And for Professor Vélez, I'm glad that you said that there are two sides to debt. But the question is, I sense that a lot of people are here saying Americans don't want to help us. But didn't the Puerto Rican elite had a major role in the embezzlement of bonistas, and aren't 80% of the bonistas Puerto Ricans who are going to lose their savings? Is this a question of the bad white Americans versus the nice, good Puerto Ricans who are struggling for their life? There is something called a kakistocracy. There is something called, and that means the government of the worst. And I have written a book. That is called Crónicas del Colapso. And I have explained clearly that part of the reason that the Americans don't want to help us is because there is a Puerto Rican elite that participated, and you described it well. So we have it in front of our nose. This is a two-way system. This is a class problem. This is not a national problem exclusively.
But the hedge funds are Americans.
I would like to answer that first. And I think when she was talking about that, and I think I used the same reference, that we talk about, we talk about these bonds, and we tend to see, ¿verdad? El hombre blanco, rojo, colorado, ¿verdad? But the reality is that the people who have these bonds are working class. They are their savings. And I was, when I was giving this talk in 2013 in Buffalo, I was telling them, look into your portfolio. If you have Puerto Rican bonds, get rid of them, right? And it's because, again, if Puerto Rico doesn't pay, the people who suffer the most are those who had invested their savings into our bonds. Those who made the decision for them doesn't feel the pain as much, and I should add this, as much, right? So there is a difference, right, in terms of class of who are the owners and who are benefiting based on these things. And I agree, the elite in here this is a revolving door between those that are in power and who are making decisions and those who are going to be paying for these decisions. And again, but I don't know what the solutions are. We see, for example, Iceland, where there was consequences to be made for those who did this risky behavior. Because again, when I want to talk about moral hazard, we tend to assign moral hazard to the countries, but the pattern of behavior is not in the countries, because most of these countries don't go back to debt in the same way that these hedge funds are doing risky bets. So the moral hazard question doesn't necessarily reflect much on individual countries as it is on this type of system. So again, how do we overcome this moral hazard problem?
Thank you for your question, Professor. I think that for me, or my analysis of the campamento, for example, as one part of this social process is exactly that. How does it become part of a process of social struggle? Not necessarily what are the outcomes right now or tomorrow. I think that requires a longer term perspective, perhaps. And of course, the campamento itself was physically very short lasting, and it was small. Something like this university strike right now, I'm very interested in what happens in the process with the university strike. But I would like to analyze it as a process of social struggle rather than outcome of X or Y part of it.
I can pass the mic. Thank you. Who was next? On the right. He was first? Yes. Okay. I'm ready. And then you can pass it to her. And then
Okay. Thank you for your presentations. To Sara Molinari, I enjoyed very much listening to your paper. I'm a professor of literature and I look at cultural practices. I'm also a reader of Gramsci. But I'm also interested in not only in responses to the debt or to the crisis, but what are the new, let's say, types of subjectivity and intersubjectivity that emerge. Professor Pantojas was concerned with what is the, let's say, what is the future of that. I would like to think of, let's say, thinking of Negri and Virno and Hart, what is the moment that is at play? What is the instant where protesters identify with each other? What are the bodily practices? What is the joy? And I was able to, I think I may have seen you in the Campamento last summer, but I was there one day where Macha Colón was singing on a stage, and Macha Colón is quite a character, an alternative singer, if you will, and it started pouring. And it was raining so much that everybody had to flee the stage and flee the streets and seek refuge. But the sense of joy and the amount of people that were touching each other and engaging each other in a certain, let's say, newfound intersubjectivity, I wouldn't necessarily look for a narrative there, as it were some prefiguring practice or political practice that would create something else, but rather think of that moment as the something else that we're looking for. Let's say, governance practices of the camp were beautiful. I had a niece who would bring food almost on a daily basis to the persons who were living in the camp. That niece had a 2-year-old daughter who would stay at the camp every once in a while. There were multi-generational interactions that were also very powerful. And I think that moment in itself is very suggestive of that resistance. That life, and I'm thinking of Judith Butler here, the plenitude of life and the dignity of life in its fullest sense can only be felt in those moments. And we can't let debt take that away from us, or a political crisis take that away from us. And there's a lot of that going on in Puerto Rico right now. So that's all I have to say.
Hi, Sarah. I just wanted to let you know I just communicated with Melissa Vargas, and she indicated that El Campamento contra la Junta is located in Caguas. They actually had to leave San Juan because they were being arrested on a daily basis. And so they just moved. It hasn't fallen apart. They're still resisting. La lucha continúa.
Hi, my question is for Maya. Okay. Yo hablo un poco español e inglés, así que, ok. Mira, yo soy de Buenos Aires, Argentina, ok. Y nosotros nos criamos durante los tiempos de los 70, ok, lo que pasó y que los Estados Unidos y la CIA siempre. Entonces yo quiero preguntarte a vos. I want to ask a question about the OPEC and the OPEC crisis. Okay, I know that affected Argentina, affected a lot, but did it affect Puerto Rico? It did affect, and this is one of the reasons why United States started using this way of making Puerto Rico pay, because it affected a lot of them, but it did affect Puerto Rico, and how much is still affecting now?
It did. Part of the economic woes started in the 70s. So, yeah,
And most of the debt starting to be issued also in the 70s as well. So we did feel it as well. Maybe we had some cushion to work with during that period, but we started feeling it as well during the 70s. So in the sense that the economic performance of the island started to contract, and also we started issuing most of the debt at that period as well. So we did feel it.
question, comment?
Agustin has one, and I'm going to make my comment as I walk over to Agustin. I'm from Guayama. right next to Santa Isabel, 1981. Sarah, I'd be interested in hearing you speak about, in the future, about the sugar cane mobilizations that happened in Santa Isabel. Santa Isabel had the first union to help the sugarcane cutters in Puerto Rico. 1981, the sugarcane leaves Puerto Rico. They're owned by the Boston Sugarcane Corporation. Take all the assets, finances, everything from Puerto Rico. And we have, I don't know which number, but it was an economic. I was one of the people who came right after, because I was married to a sugarcane cutter. And we had a forced immigration, economic immigration to the United States right after that. So I'm interested in hearing that connection, because that was 1975 to 81. And it was really powerful, it was unionized. And Guayama was part of that movement. There's one book called Sugarcane and something Puerto Rico, and that happened in Guayama. So, Agustin.
Yeah, so let's let Alex maybe answer this question.
Yeah, I think that Emilio's question is very provocative in the good sense of the word, because what is emerging is a new way of doing politics, a new way of building political community, and a new meaning of political action. And this is precisely something that I heard my friend Liliana Cotto saying for a long time, that we had not paid enough attention in Puerto Rico to collective action, to politics beyond the political parties and beyond the status question. And in this, we saw that, an example of that in the Puerto Rican Social Forum 10 years ago. No? Liliana actually wrote a very good article about a reflection 10 years ago of the Puerto Rican Foro Social, Puerto Rican Social Forum Puertorriqueño. And actually 10 years ago, it was even different than now. I mean, the protests without a telos, without a clear kind of a direction on the ability of politics that is open, and what is going to be the direction that is going to take, without a fleshed out kind of a program. I mean, the old slogan that Fals Borda coined in Colombia in the 1980s, de la protesta a la propuesta, from a protest to proposal, which is still a challenge, which is still necessary. Now you do not only protest because the outcome could be just some cultural changes in the political culture, a new generation of activism, having a different kind of sensibility. All of those are important outcomes. But we want to build a project, have different names: radical democratic socialism of the 21st century, etc. What it is, what is a project of decolonization in Puerto Rico is an open question. But that is being built in that process of assembly, of collective decision making, of cultural practice. And this is something, and one of the wonderful things of both presentation, but on the sister from the University of Puerto Rico, Mayra, which is the need of placing the Puerto Rican, we are used to Puerto Rican exceptionalism. The need to place it within the larger historical and global landscape of what's going on with the rise of finance capital in the context of the crisis from above. But from below, also these forms of collective action, these forms of community making are happening throughout the world, and particularly in Latin America also. So this is, we have to adjust ourselves also to the fact that these are new ways of doing politics. And what is going to be the direction that this is going to have is going to be creative. And this is what is exciting about the moment. It's a moment that, as you're saying, quoting Negri, is a moment that is promising insofar as we're able to build something radically different. And we don't know. We don't know what is going to be the outcome, but there is that possibility. Liliana.
Let's see if they.
Okay.
Could you answer after I speak, because it's the same line, and then we can just summarize? Would that be okay with you? Because I wanted to answer Emilio, and he has to go.
No, I'm not going. I will listen to you.
That's okay with you. That's okay with you. If not, I'll give it to you. No, it's in the line of the compañera, and I asked Emilio not to leave because tomorrow I will be talking about that, but I am really glad that I can mention this now so that I have more time. I brought pictures, photographs about the processes in Puerto Rico right now. So what is happening with Campamento contra la Junta? Right now they are in Caguas. The place is a community center that is called Urbe a Pies, and it is a gallery, an art gallery of community organizers that are also young, because the ages of the people there go from 17 probably to 30 years. The ages in Jornada Se Acabaron las Promesas are a little bit older. But anyhow, there they are doing something that is interesting. And this is what I was trying to tell Emilio. There are things that transform themselves. Now they are there in some sort of alliance with a community group that didn't have a tradition of direct action. But what they are going to do now is that they promote the cultural program. Like, for instance, they promote poetry, music. I have a map that is called El Mapa Ruta Betances. I went there and I spoke about Betances. And they have, because that is an area in Caguas that is dying. So they are entering in a process of urban, spatial kind of transformation, which the community groups that are not as political as they are have been doing for many years. So there is this sort of getting together of that type. And right now they are planning on, because this project is a project that it was like a rescate of that building. And now they are thinking about doing rescates of other buildings, but now with Campamento. So that means that at that level, at that very micro level, they are experimenting experimenting with the things that maybe they didn't work at the first time, but they are still experimenting. I interviewed 5 organizations, and I'm going to talk about them. 5 organizations: Campamento, Jornada, MUS, Vamos, and Trayecto Dignidad, Somos Dignos. Concertación contra la Junta, I wasn't able to interview. So, but this is going in the line that you were mentioning. And they are talking about doing work at the level of transforming subjectivities, at the level of putting together the emotional processes with the political processes, which is something that usually the more institutionalized political parties do not do, because they are so much into the structure and into the macro politics that they are not doing that. And decolonization has to be at the level of subjectivity. Like, for instance, an organization like Vamos talks a lot and has a very, very different perspective than other movements, but at the level of putting the priority into popular education, they have been very inconsistent. And I tell you, because I belong to that organization. So they say that they are going to do transformation with popular education, and when you see the priorities, the organizational priorities, that is always the last. But those are contradictions that we have to deal with. We have to deal with them. And the fact that they exist, and the fact that the Arab Spring happened as it happened, doesn't mean that we're not going to go on with this sense that it is not a direct process, it is a very sinuous and very contradictory process. And it's a question like people like me at this age, I have decided that I'm going to do, my work in that line.
Sarah, I just want to say something more for Sarah. So she will respond to it's the same train of thought. Thank you.
It's a Puerto Rican thread. It's a long thread.
That's it, and it goes like this.
Collective thread.
No, but Sarah mentioned Gramsci, and I just reminded Agustin that Gramsci developed a theory when he was in jail and when fascism was dominant and when they were in the defensive. He developed the concept of guerra de posiciones and guerra de movimientos. So if you stay at the level of guerra de posiciones, if you stay at the level of resistance, you're never going to move anywhere. So what I'm trying to say, and by making aware of the class element underpinning this whole thing, is to try to understand that this building of consciousness and solidarity should have a purpose. Otherwise, we're screwed.
Thank you for all the comments. Yes.
Very provocative.
My use of Gramsci in this paper comes from Kate Crehan's recent book on inequality and its narratives, and I was interested in really her reading of Gramsci and this idea of narratives and common sense and good sense. But right, that's an interesting point about the war of position and the purpose. I think, for example, we could see the student strike has clear objectives in terms of stopping the budget cuts, the moratorium on the debt, and to do the audit. I think it's interesting also how many people in different sectors of Puerto Rico have been uniting around the debt audit cause. I mean, that recent petition has over 100,000 signatures. That's like I think a clear objective that is, so the question is why does that unite certain sectors of the left, perhaps more conservative folks? And I'm losing my train of thought, but I like the idea of transforming subjectivities, and another scholar I draw on, Yarimar Bonilla, her book Non-Sovereign Futures, her recent ethnography in Guadalupe, labor activism, is really about that. The affective dimensions of social movements, the local level subjective dimensions of social movements, and part of that question is what I think kinds of organizational forms are available to young people now. Unionized activism, for example, is not as available now to young people as it was in the past. These certain avenues of a certain form of organized, collective action, I think, it asks us to change the analysis, perhaps. So I think those were just the few points I had to make.
Again, I don't study movement itself, but the reason why I was working on this paper is that, and I think here was mentioned, we tend to suffer the worst of all the ethnocentrism. We think that everything bad happens only to Puerto Rico. Solamente en Puerto Rico, blah, something happened. And I wrote this as an effort to say, listen, these type of crises don't just happen to Puerto Rico because we are Puerto Rico, it happens to other things. So there is a colonial issue, there's a political issue, but there's also a financial issue that independent, if we were independent and we were a sovereign state, it will still happen, we weren't aware of it. what had just happened. So there's two factors here. There's the political colonial factor, and there's also the financial factor. And I think the class issue that you are bringing is precisely this. But at least with the young people, and I'm not that far away, I think I'm not that far away, but I started calling them the crisis generation, because these are the group of people that they don't know what's going to happen after they graduate. They see their future has basically quantum properties. It actually exists and doesn't exist at the same time. And they just have this very weird optimism about the future. They know there's going to be bad, but the same thing, they think they can make it different. Not necessarily better, probably not worse, but different. So there's this, ironic optimism among them, but they just don't know, because they have felt that everybody have failed them. The movements and leadership have failed them, so they really don't know what to follow. And I think this is what you also are talking about, it's not just protest, but also the purpose. And I think that's what they're figuring out.
I think, unfortunately, I got word that our time is exhausted. So I think maybe we can continue.
We still have one more
discussion
panel
and
left.
people can get some snacks and prepare.
Claro.